DeepMind solves the protein folding problem, Tom Adams solves the world energy crisis, and is Clue a good board game? Find out on the Heat Exchanger podcast. All right, and hello everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Heat Exchanger podcast featuring Jake and Vince. Today's episode brought to you by a mass balance on your local dump. Garbage in, garbage out. How you doing today, Vince?
I'm doing pretty well. Canada's doing decently in the Olympics, so I'm happy.
Perfect. And there is evidence that our podcast is taped kind of live, and we haven't just front end loaded and taped a bunch of episodes to release in the slow burn, because we actually are in the middle of the Olympics right now. So good job with that.
Yeah. So why don't we start talking about, our podcast yesterday and some of the analytics, and just, chat about the number of people that have been actually listening, surprisingly. Maybe it's just 3 people watching it, hundreds of times, but at least we're getting our views.
Yeah, I could see that. It's just been me. I've just been Control R on my Firefox page all day.
I mean, I have like 5 different accounts, right? So I've, my own email account, my wife's email account. We have a shared email account. So I could pump up the views if I wanted to,
I would like to say to everybody listening at home that I do have a Gmail account for every course that I teach, right? I have a 2E, a 4N, a 4G, a 4H. And I have not subscribed. You can look it up. I have not subscribed or liked the video from any of those accounts. I feel pure of heart. So there you go.
But, so Jake, do you want to take us through some of the analytics that we see on the YouTube?
Yeah, there's nothing better than making video content based on your previous videos content. So there's nothing easier than that, right? So way more views than we thought. We have 22 subscribers at this point, about, 5 days in from when we released it, give or take, from when we're recording this right now. So thank you to all of our subscribers. I don't know who's actually listened to it. We have received some email and Microsoft Teams feedback on the content, most of it either saying that it's hilarious and you weren't expecting to hear the two of us banter about stuff like that, or complaints about how freaking long it is, right? I had somebody tell me that they need to listen to the podcast 20 minutes at a time for 6 days and then get 1 day of rest. And if that's a weekly podcast, that's the right length. And I'm like, okay, sure. Everybody's got an opinion then. But yeah, anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for your support and for leaving a few comments and stuff. So everybody that's done that's been good. I have actually looked up the rules of judo. So there was a comment about judo being criminally underrated. Terrific use of the phrase criminally underrated, by the way. So I had to look it up. Did you look up judo? Yes.
I did one better. I watched judo.
Oh, shit. well, we had somebody win a medal in judo, right?
Two of our Canadian women won at different weight classes, bronze. I didn't know one of our women was actually ranked first, so it was kind of like a letdown that she wasn't in the gold medal match, but at least she got a bronze medal.
Yeah,
but apparently we're good at judo. I have no idea.
Nor did I. So so I guess 5.5 days, up to 450 views. That's pretty cool. And Vince, you had an interesting insight about you can actually look up the viewership by timestamp on the video, right? So you had an interesting insight related to that.
So I mean, YouTube gives us really good analytics, right? So it tells us like who's watching and all that stuff, but it also tells us specifically like in the video how many people are watching at what time. So as you would guess, like at the very beginning, we have lots of viewership, 81%. I don't know why 20% of people are not starting at the beginning, but 81% of the people are watching the beginning. And then there's the 3% of the sad souls that lasted all the way to the 2-hour mark. Thanks for the 3%. So 3% of 400. So that's, 12 people.
Yeah,
may not be
you and me.
Yeah,
you and, me.
and whoever, right? Like are like half of our 22 subscribers. Thanks. But it also tells us the spikes, the parts where people are more interested in. And the first spike that we see is at 40:28. And so if you want to go back to the last podcast, go to 40:28 to see what we're talking about, you could do that. But just let me tell you, it's Jake telling his story about Airbnb, right? And specifically, it's about the Airbnb host that picked them up and was talking about going to America to simply meet girls and do things to those girls, right? So I guess that's what you guys you guys want to hear, and I don't know if that's the kind of story that we want to keep telling, but
I mean, it sells, right? Clearly it works. I also like how you distinctly avoided saying it. Exactly the phrasing that I used, which is the phrasing that the Airbnb host used. Okay. I didn't say that because like, that's how I would say it. Well, it probably is actually, if we're being totally frank, but I think that people just wanted that soundbite. That's going to come back to haunt me. I swear to God, roast the profs in my tenure interview, the president of the university is going to play this back to me and say, is this the kind of content that you put up in your classes? And I'm like, no, that is why our podcast is distinctly not affiliated with McMaster. It says right there on the page, right? And so we're just out here having a good time. I can just be myself. So, you will hear the occasional swear word, you will hear the occasional, curse or whatever. Nothing, not trying to be disrespectful. It's just kind of the way it is. That's the kind of person that I am when you get me outside of a classroom. So whatever, good for the viewers. And by the way, that's the reason that 81% of the viewers only start at the beginning, because I'm going to assume the other 19% got a link to a specific timestamp from their friends and said, hey, listen to this. It's ridiculous. I can't believe my prof just said that. So
that's a good point. I mean, like at 40:28, there's 18% of people. So 18 plus 81 is 99%. So
yeah, there you go. So that's good for an engineering analysis, plus minus 5% for the slop factor. We've pretty much nailed it there. That's pretty good. We also have a small spike at the beginning of Noel's interview. So thanks everybody for tuning in for that. I'm hoping that there's some quality there. And the precipitous, I wish we had videos, but we have zero budget for this, so we don't have any video cap. We don't even have multiple channels. So if one of us screws up, we just have to redo everything. It's probably why it takes us 25 hours to record a 1 hour podcast. But the precipitous drop off from the very beginning in terms of like viewership is kind of, it looks a lot, Vince, like lecture attendance, actually.
Yeah, like first week to second week. Yeah,
exponential decay of lecture attendance. That sounds pretty good. Anyway, let's move on from that. Thank you to all of our viewers, and we hope that you actually enjoy the content and you're not just doing it because of the novelty. And we'll continue to put out some episodes and we can talk about that. So we're going to move on to some kind of science and tech in the news, one kind of impressive and extremely relevant thing that we want to talk about, and then one kind of goofy piece of tech that we think is kind of stupid. The first one is the relevant and important thing. And Vince, can you introduce us to the deep fold algorithm using AI to predict the folding structure of proteins?
Yeah. It's DeepMind.
Sorry. AlphaFold. AlphaFold.
So yeah, I could definitely give kind of a background of what the DeepMind AlphaFold is all about. So let me kind of just go back in time, right? For the uninitiated, there is something called the protein folding problem, which is a grand challenge problem that has been around for about 50 years. But let's go back to about the 1950s, where people are starting thinking about the structure of protein, because knowing the structure of protein helps us to know the function of proteins. And so if you remember in your biology class or whatnot, double helixes, DNA structure with Watson and Crick. And then around a similar era, Pauling came out and say in the 1950s, hey, I think proteins have these shapes, alpha helixes and beta sheets. And so, but that was kind of the extent to which what we understood the protein structure at that time. And then fast forward to about the 1970s, people are really thinking about using computer science, merging computer science with proteomics, a study of proteins, to try to figure out protein structure. Because at that time and even now, the gold standard, or really the only way to understand protein structure, is through experimental work. So that could be X-ray crystallography, which is, again, the gold standard. And then in recent years, we have cryo electron microscopy, things like that, where we could capture the 3D structure of a protein. But with DeepMind AlphaFold, what they do is now that we could put in the amino acid sequence, and they could give you a prediction of what the 3D structure of the protein would be without having to do experimental work. Now, this work has been ongoing since the 70s, and we have made incremental improvements through the 90s and the early 2000s. But with DeepMind AlphaFold, this really is a quantum leap. The degree of specificity and accuracy was astounding, to say the least. And this has immense implication for the study of proteins, proteomics, and especially with drug discovery, and let's just say the study of disease mechanism, especially the more rare diseases that people just don't have the money to spend on, right? So now, instead of doing extensive experimental work, we could plug in the amino acids, the primary structure of the protein, and get a 3D structure or a tertiary structure, at least an estimate of what the 3D structure is, so that we can now look at, well, where's the business end of the protein? Where is the functional ends of the protein? So that's kind of the introduction to this talk. Jake, you could probably speak a little bit more on the AI side, right?
So like the cool thing about this is, and you mentioned the crystallography, but did you mention how long it takes, right? Like, so it takes months to characterize one protein folding pattern through that crystallography method. Whereas this thing, as you mentioned, it was about, or I think as you mentioned, it really kind of came out about 6 months ago or so around in December time, maybe a little bit more than 6 months ago. But the big news now, right, is that they just released the structures of all 20,000 known proteins in the human body out into the wild. They're just like, here you go. Here's what all of those do. And up in like in the 1950s, as you mentioned, when they started characterizing these proteins, it takes months, right? So the impact is like, it's the difference between having to do your calculations for a chemical engineering problem by hand versus just using an Aspen Plus flow sheet. Like, that's the equivalent change of what we're talking about here, right? Trying to solve, hundreds of equations by hand, to create one steady state operating point now just becomes click the button, right? Click the run button, and there you go. And the impact of that, and maybe that just leans a little bit into how students should feel excited or feel blessed by the fact that they've got this technology that helps them do this sort of thing. Because now, when you have something relatable to that, to proteotics, then that's like a huge step forward. So yeah, the AI, as you said, it's not new, right? It's been around since the 1980s. Engineering is all about AI these days, all about neural networks, all about clustering and that sort of thing. And statisticians and mathematicians kind of roll their eyes, right? They say, yeah, congratulations, you've got this really cool tool that we've known and like have quantified the accuracy of and kind of like derived back in the 1980s. The difference between then and now, obviously, is the computers, right? So AI, for those of us that are listening, let's just focus on maybe neural networks. And there's lots of different types of neural networks, so we won't get into it. We talk a little bit about those in some elective courses, but like, let's just talk about your basic feed forward artificial neural network, right? So that's where you have a bunch of signals that come in and they get processed by a bunch of transformation functions, which feed into each other in some wild spider web of like interacting signals in order to predict some outcome. And for the sake of ease, let's just say that there's one outcome that we're trying to predict, which is maybe the structure. Maybe it's the three-dimensional structure in Cartesian coordinates of what this protein might look like. And The thing there is that nowadays AI is so easy. There's lots of packages on Python or MATLAB or whatever you like, where you can just download for free these neural network. Well, MATLAB not for free, but Python certainly. TensorFlow, for example, and you can create a neural network out of your set of data, and it just kind of like crunches through all these different numbers. And the whole reason that an ANN works as well as it does is because it kind of just does everything, right? It's just chaos. It's not even organized chaos. It's just like, hey, you think of like a linear regression, right? A linear regression is like, oh, there's a causal relationship between X and Y. So I'm going to express that relationship of variance through some expression. A neural network is like, sure, maybe there's a relationship between X and Y, but maybe there's also a relationship between some transformed X and some transformed Y that I don't know. But the beautiful thing about having computers that can fit like literally thousands of models at the same time that all interact with each other in very nonlinear ways is, first of all, impressive, right? And works. But second of all, a little bit dangerous because you don't really know what's going on under the hood, right? Like a lot of the time people will say, oh, I fit an AI to predict the prices of avocados in California, on a seasonal basis. And look, it predicts with 99.9% accuracy, but you don't know how much of that is overfitting of the data that you did provide, and whether or not you get an outlier point that doesn't conform to that data, how badly the model might mispredict that. Now, the good news about the AlphaFold is that it seems to be pretty well vetted, right? It's compared against all of the known proteins in the human body with over 95% accuracy. And they have a bit of a spooky line there, right? They say like, what is it? Let me find the, yeah, it says, and I quote, the system was able to predict the shape of a protein to a good standard 95% of the time, right? So right there, it's not exactly clear what a good standard is, right? And 95% of the time is great, but obviously it depends on what a good standard is. So anyway, AI, really cool. I don't mean to go off on this rant about artificial intelligence. I just want our listeners to know that like AI is a thing that you have access to, right? You have access to creating models using artificial intelligence. It's not as spooky as it sounds. It's actually quite intuitive. It's just a bunch of connected linear and nonlinear regression models. It's just like you have no hope of actually interpreting what the heck is going on once you make it, right? So it's not grounded in fundamental modeling science. And as a result, some mathematicians or statisticians will roll their eyes a little bit at it, especially when it's used without really validating that model. Because they'll say like, yeah, given enough degrees of freedom, given enough coefficients, you can fit anything to do anything, right? Like you could predict anything based on anything as long as you have enough computing power. But is that a meaningful relationship? That's the real question, right? But it seems to be a meaningful relationship here.
Like, well, what you said was completely correct, right? Like that we really don't know under the hood what's happening, because like we're thinking about, as scientists, we're thinking about, let's just say, electrostatic interactions, hydrogen bonds and whatnot, and how the amino acids interact with each other. But AlphaFold has no idea of any of that. It's just taking a look at the data and then see how the data works, and then now makes prediction from that data, right? So yeah, to your point, it's just we don't know what's happening under the hood. It's interesting because like with AI, like things move fairly fast. Like in 2018, they had this. They had AlphaFold in 2018, and it wasn't super impressive. That it was like a little bit better than the other algorithms. But in 2020, in November, it was heads and shoulders above all the other algorithms. And so it talks about the Google computing power, but also just like having the correct algorithm, or at least a right algorithm to do the job, right? Like obviously. Yeah. Certain algorithm might fit the job better in certain instances, but it's fascinating to me to see.
Yeah.
And when we talk about like accuracy, right? Like they're looking at like 1.6 angstrom, which is like very minute, and I think they could reduce that. And they're at a point where it's like they don't know whether or not the prediction is wrong, or is it just an artifact from the experimental data. Like that's what we're talking about, right? So.
Yeah, which is incredible. And yeah, that's the kind of thing that, again, a lot of scientists will resist. It comes up in the field of optimization, which, as we know, I'm a little bit invested in, right? Like, it's a very black box approach. It's the same reason that things like particle swarm optimization or those meta heuristic methods, simulated annealing, what am I trying to think? Genetic algorithms, right? Like, all of these are hot topics for optimization in the same way that neural networks are hot topics in data and modeling, but they are not grounded in any kind of mathematical basis or any kind of scientific reasoning. And for that reason, they're just completely black box, right? Like, the model predicts the outcome, but it doesn't predict the outcome by, say, modeling, I don't know, let's just think of like pressure drop in a pipe is based on the Bernoulli principles, based on Reynolds numbers, it's based on scientific fundamentals, whereas these are not based on scientific fundamentals, right? Like, if you actually go in and look at those, it's like, oh, in this transformation function, y equals to 1.16 sigmoid x minus 3. Oh, that's cool. And then in the very, it doesn't mean anything. But the point is that the outcome means something, right? And when you are starting to predict things to the point where you don't know if it's wrong because the algorithm is wrong, or if it's wrong because the data is wrong, right? When the data in the model start to overlap in terms of their ability to predict these outcomes, then the strong argument can be made that the model is just as good as the experimental data, right? So use the model prediction for things like, for your step forward. So like, this is like on the same level as like the CRISPR discovery from a few years back, right? Like, this is huge. It's like an industrial revolution of proteotics. It really is huge. So
yeah, absolutely. And like, I mean, that there's small caveats, right? Like, so AlphaFold is unable to, let's just say, predict the structure of protein-protein interaction, that they don't know what the shape is, or if there's like quote unquote more floppy proteins, they're not very good at doing the 3D structure of it. But for the most part, that they have mapped out not just the human genes, but beyond that, like, common genes that we see in E. coli and all the common hosts that we use, right? So this is a huge step forward with small caveats, right? But I wouldn't put it past DeepMind and that community, whereas in a few years' time that they might be able to, let's just say, model closer the protein-protein interactions and things like that. So and to just give you an idea, like, and a sneak peek, like, we're gonna talk about like board games like for our tier list. Like DeepMind AlphaZero, right? Trained on like board games like Go and chess. It took them less than a day to beat all the other like engines. So it took like, I think, 9 hours for DeepMind to learn, or for AlphaZero to learn chess, to beat Stockfish 8, which is like the common open source engine that people use for chess. So it's just like the computing power is insane, right? So
excellent segue or relation to the final segment. You gotta love that. That's planned content. You can't teach that, kids. You can't teach that. It's just too
preparation, Jake. That you should try doing sometime.
Oh my God. So rude. Okay. So that's cool. And there's like a bird freaking out outside my window now, so that's fun. Would you like to move on to our second piece of kind of tech news, which is certainly less important, but nonetheless deserves to be mentioned, if anything, just to say, like, this is 2021. We live in a society known as 2021 and COVID-19.
Yeah, so I mean, 2020 and 2021 introduced us to the casual use of, or the mandatory use of, masks, and obviously, I guess companies want to tech out the mask. So Razer and LG have this like super tech mask on the market that's like apparently, as good as N95, reusable, and now they want to put headphones in and mics into these masks, because you're going to be wearing it all the time apparently, and it says you could use it three times as much or as often, or like, so N95 is supposed to be one use, and they say, hey, you could use it three times more than an N95. So I'm guessing you could use it three times. I'm guessing you could wash it, or I don't know if you could wash it actually.
Well,
maybe sterilize
yeah.
it.
So it comes. So for just to close the loop. So Razer, which makes a lot of the PC gaming gear, and its like philosophy is that if you just make everything light up in rainbow colors using LEDs, it's rad. So and I'm like, I have a custom built PC, but I don't have any LEDs on it. But I do have a Razer mouse. I do have a Razer mouse pad, right? And it's all about like all those different chroma colors, right? So they've got this thing called Project Hazel, right? The N95 mask that looks like a Bane mask, right? Like it looks like Bane from The Dark Knight
Batman.
Rises,
Yeah.
right? So so like, I mean, Tom Hardy would approve, but yeah, it just like lights up. It's got like removable cartridges, like literally, it's got like cartridges. It looks like, and it's like a sealed mask that's like got clear plastic on the front. It really does look like a Cyberpunk 2077 something or other, right? That you would put on, and yeah, and it lights up. But what I wanted to say based on that is like, you think you can clean it or whatever, but apparently the charging case for this thing has like a UV sterilization light in it. So like you put it in the charging case and it sterilizes the mask for you while you're doing it. It's just like, I'm sorry, it's just so over the top. It blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, like why, right? Like, it's $250. I'm guessing that's USD, right? And then it's just
250 is the, like, it's not even released. It's the LG one, right? The wearable air purifier by LG. That's $250 US. And this one doesn't even have a price yet.
Yeah. I could buy a cloth mask I could use all the time for like $1. There you go.
Yeah. I bought I always wear those neck buffs, right? Because I'm terrible at remembering a mask. So when I leave the house in the morning, if I leave the house in the morning, I just like put on one of those neck buffs, and then I've always got it on so that if and when I go into the grocery store and forget that I'm supposed to wear a mask, I just kind of pull it up over my face. But I bought those neck buffs in 2020 February. I was in a Bonspiel called the Horse Race Bonspiel. Maybe it was late January, but the theme for my team was, on Amazon, I bought all these neckies, like terrible patterns. Anybody that's had a class with me in the last year has like seen these patterns, and a bunch of like multicolored bandanas. And we just made a point of like, everybody that we played against, we forced them all to wear a different colored bandana. And like, we just gave out all these bandanas and these neckies. And so I've got like all these leftovers, and that's what I've been wearing. I haven't even, like, I guess that's kind of lame, the fact that I spent money on a Bonspiel, but I didn't have to spend any money on masks for this entire pandemic because I've got all these like cloth things,
For people that don't know what a Bonspiel is I think it's a curling thing, no?
It's a curling tournament. Yeah. Oh, come on. You got, okay, maybe not. Right. So yeah. So Bonspiel is a curling tournament. So I like curling. I like most recreational sports, as we know. And I play with Dr. Adams, for example, our guest coming up in the next segment, plays with me. But this is a tournament in Georgetown with a former Masters colleague, Kyle Lefebvre. And yeah, curling Bonspiels are mostly about the good time. It's not really about the curling. It's just about going out and having a couple of beers and having a laugh with the other people at the tournament. So they're usually a lot of fun. This one is called a horse race because you can nominate players from your team and then name the horse that they ride, and then they have a bunch of stick ponies. I swear to God, this is true, right? So a stick pony, it's a horse head on a stick. And then they like tape out this gigantic grid of like 6 racing lanes. And then they have these gigantic novelty foam dice that has like which lane number 1 to 6 on it. And then the other die is like move forward or move backwards. And you bet Monopoly money on it. And the whole purpose of the curling game is to win Monopoly money in order to bet on the horses so that you can win prizes like bottles of wine and stuff. It's actually hilarious. So anyway,
it's a lot of alcohol infused fun.
Well, seems to be a pattern with me actually these days, but
yeah. But fantastic segue into our interview that's coming up. Right?
Yes. See, that's called preparation, Vince. Look it up. Maybe you should try it sometime.
But before we go into our interview, let's kind of recap some of the Olympic success that Canada has, right? So
Sure.
Jake, have you watched some of the Olympics?
I've watched a little bit. So we've turned it on in the evenings, maybe the last 2 or 3 nights in a row. And sorry if you can hear that through the microphone. It is thunderstorming outside my house right now. So and I am in an upstairs office with a window. So apologies for that. But yeah, no, we've turned it on a few times. So a few nights ago, we saw some Canadian beach volleyball. The women were playing. Laura and I watched some of that. 2 nights ago, we turned it on and it had men's field hockey, which I would not be caught dead watching, but Laura loves field hockey. And I'll be honest, the men's field hockey was much more watchable than recreational women's field hockey that we've seen, like as anything would be, right? But it was fine.
They also don't play in a field.
Well, they played on turf. So here's the thing, right? Like they're playing on this turf, and they can whack it, man, and they can really like have at it. But the thing about it is, like, every time the ball would go, there'd be this big burst of water, right? There'd be this like splash. I'm like, oh, it must have. And they said that it like had thunderstormed or something. In I think they're playing in Osaka, is where the field hockey games are. And I'm like, oh, it must just be water on the field. But they said, no, if like the commentators brought it up, if you think that this is residual water from the rain, that's not true. They actually water the turf for field hockey to like soften the ball, to like soften the roll. So like it's wet always on purpose. It's kind of like how on the Mac fields, they put all those rubber pellets down, but like they have like watered turf so that it's not as bouncy, and so that it's a little bit more predictable. Like when you hit the ball along the ground, it doesn't like skip up and like jump away because it gets weighed down by the water. I thought that was kind of cool. We also watched some volleyball sixes. That was on the other night too. And my God, can those guys rip the ball? Like this one guy served a ball at 133 kilometers an hour, right? On a volleyball court. Like, that's hard to do. And to like tip it in, as somebody that like, plays a lot of tennis, like to hit the ball that fast and like over a net that high and have it dip down with some topspin to like stay in play is like crazy. Like, I'm here to tell you, that's wild. So
yeah, I was watching some volleyball too. I mean, there's no chance. Like if they set it up for a good, spike, like there's no chance like that you could dig it, like it's crazy. Anyways, I watched a lot of swimming. Go Canadian women. Silver medal. I watched Maggie McLean or McNeil won the gold. I also watched the backstroke last night. I think Mass was her name that won the silver. I watched the synchro diving.
Yeah, I saw the synchro diving actually. Yes, I didn't see it live, but I watched the replay of it. That was pretty sweet. We did say that diving was one of my favorites, and I maintain that. I thought it was really cool. So,
and then we just missed the medal for the 10-meter synchro dive last night. So, and then I watched the highlights of the softball because, again, my buddy's sister is on the softball team, so they got bronze. So kudos to them. And then I watched triathlon because that was the only thing that was on TV at like 6:30 p.m. So it is what it is.
They have to start it early. Right?
Yeah, like I mean, it was crazy at the finish line. Like the guy that won just like started puking his like lungs out. It was so hot. Right. That like even these impeccable athletes were literally like dying.
Oh yeah.
Like the first day, it's bad when the archer, like one of the archer fainted because it was so hot. Like an archer.
Such a dynamic sport, archery, right? Make sure you drink your Gatorade,
Like, yeah, so it's really hot there apparently. But like I've been watching all the sports. Like I watch fencing. Because
fencing's cool though.
Because the guy that won gold was from Hong Kong, so my in-laws wanted to watch it, obviously to support Hong Kong. So we watched some fencing. I had no idea how fencing worked, but like apparently like their foil, their sword, whatever, saber
foil. I got it.
It's like attached to a wire, and then like their body is like literally has like tinfoil on them. So like when the foil hits your body, there's conduction, and then like it lights up your helmet to know that you scored a point. I never knew that until I watched.
That's all.
I was like, that's cool. Like,
So I have two comments. First of all, shout out to the board game Munchkin, because we won't be ranking Munchkin on the tier list, but Munchkin has one of the funniest meme cards in it. So those of us that don't know what it is, Munchkin's kind of like really, really low key Dungeons and Dragons sort of thing where you can kit out your character, but it's like a deck of cards that you just draw and you play with. Yeah. But one of the items that you can get is called an aluminum foil. And like, it's just a picture of a guy with a sword made of tin foil, like trying to stab something, and it just crinkles at the ends. It's like the worst weapon in the game, and it's called aluminum foil. And I think it's hilarious. So now about the heat, right? Just bringing that up. The beach volleyball, when we were watching it, they were showing the sand temperature. Okay. The sand temperature was 50.1 degrees Celsius.
That's
right.
Insane.
So like, just to put this in perspective, right? For those of us at home, like the known bath water temperature, that is like the maximum bath water temperature that a human will like take and not be like, feel like it's scalding, is like 44 degrees Celsius. Right. So like, that's like some automated showers, they don't go higher than 45 degrees Celsius. You can't make some showers, right? You like program in the temperature instead of like just having a hot, cold thing. And you can't have a shower hotter than 45. And like the sand temperature is well above that on the feet. Like that has to be like, they have to do something like churn the sand a little bit once in a while so that it doesn't just sit there and bake in between games. Cause like, I mean, calluses on your feet or like, whatever aside.
Blisters, right?
Oh my God. It's gotta be so bad.
But I have questions, Jake. I don't know if that's preparation on your part or you're just like a bathing shower of like a fanatic that knows like, bathing water is 44 degrees. Like how do you even know that fact?
All right. So this was not preparation. This is just, stream of consciousness. You are never going to believe where I learned that fact. I'm going to give you 3 guesses. And for those of us listening that are actually like at this point and still paying attention, this is not pre-prepared. So Vince has no idea. So Vince, I will give you one guess. Let's do one guess to save some time. But I'll tell you, I learned that in a class in university when I was doing my undergrad in chemical engineering and management. So what class?
Heat transfer.
Great guess, but wrong. Okay. I learned that fact in 3rd year marketing. Okay. No, I swear to God. So let me tell you why. So
management students speaking the truth.
Management students, we don't just learn time value of money and like how to finance a mortgage and also, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and human resources. Thank you very much. No, we learn cool stuff like that. So that is because in 3rd year marketing, the entire course is set up as a series of in-class case studies where there's a book of marketing case studies, usually failed marketing case studies, and like you try to like analyze what they did wrong and how you would fix it. And the reason that came up is because one product in one of the case studies was one of the first programmable showers, right? So it's like fancy shower, you like put in the temperature. And the lesson from that is that like 44 is the highest temperature that anybody can really deal with. Okay. Maybe 45, but really this is just a known fact. And the mistake that this company made was they made the maximum temperature on the thermostat for the shower 44 or 44.5 or something. And they learned this lesson, right? That like consumers don't want a product that they have to max out, right? Because they feel like they don't have the ability to go hotter even if they wanted, even though they don't, right? But like when people are setting the thermostat to like 95% maximum, right? They feel like, oh, this thing sucks. It doesn't even get hot enough for me or whatever. So what they learned is that they had to make the maximum temperature kind of like 50 or whatever, so that when people got up to like 40, 45, they were only at maybe like 60% power and they felt better about themselves in terms of like the experience that they were getting, because they want things to be in the middle, right? Humans like things in the middle. You don't want things to be at an extreme, especially if it's something like a hot shower or something where you want to be able to go higher if you feel like you, oh, what if I'm like really cold one day? I want to have like a super hot shower. So anyway, that's where that came from. Fun fact.
The more you know.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with Dr. Tom Adams, who is going to solve the world's energy crisis, from what I've heard. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. So today we're joined by Dr. Tom Adams. We're one of our esteemed colleagues. How are you doing today, Tom?
Doing great. How you doing?
Good. So Tom, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you go to school and how did you get to Canada?
Yeah, so I grew up in the American Midwest, and I went to Michigan State University, which is where my engineering career started. And I ended up doing 2 bachelor's degrees, one in chemical engineering and one in computer science. And I did that because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And it really wasn't until my final year that I really had my heart set on academia, becoming a professor, and having a career in research. So after I graduated, I went to University of Pennsylvania. I worked with Professor Warren Cedar, so he was my PhD supervisor. I did a postdoc at MIT for a couple of years with Paul Barton's lab, and so that was on energy systems. And then I got an offer to come to McMaster, and I wasn't at all really minded to come to Canada specifically, but McMaster has a really excellent research pedigree in process systems engineering. It's definitely, I'd say, top 5 in the world. And so, for me to get an offer from McMaster was really a no-brainer. And everybody in the States like, oh yeah, you should absolutely go to McMaster. Like, no question. So no one thought that was a weird thing for me to leave the States to come to Canada. But now I'm here. I'm so glad I came, right? I love it here. I'm Canadian now. And I have a really great department, and I'm just really happy to be here.
All right, that's awesome. Thanks, Tom. And the department is happy that you're here too, from what I hear, anyway. So, so speaking of getting into research and coming to Mac because of the Good Controls Group, just tell us a little bit maybe about your research and maybe the courses that you teach, and what are you into for research?
Yeah, so I'm in a field called process systems engineering. So that's a subset of chemical engineering where we basically look at putting pieces of chemical technology together in a working system. So my very specific specialty is process design. So my role would be looking at different pieces of equipment, putting everything together into a working unit. So what do I choose? How big should each thing be? What are the flow rates, chemicals, temperatures, pressures, and putting them all together into a chemical plant at the billion-dollar scale. And we do that largely with the help of computer simulation. So going back to my computer science background, the bread and butter of what I do every day is building models of the chemical plant. So out of different pieces of chemical technology, using lots of different software. And what we do is we build very large simulations so we can simulate how a plant will work. When I turn this knob or change this value, how do things change in the plant? If will it explode? Will it be great? Efficiencies, all that kind of stuff. So it's really driven by creation and invention. And that's the field I'm in. And the applications are almost entirely within sustainable energy systems. So I'm really interested in solving Canada's big picture question about what do we do with the first $1 trillion of investment towards sustainable energy. And so that could mean, are we, shifting to electric cars? Are we going to a hydrogen economy? Are we going with CO2 capture from power plants? What are all the different technologies and ways that we want to get there that gives us the best economic return on our investment? So we want to have, if we're going to spend $1 trillion, for example, how do we avoid the most CO2 or reduce our emissions and footprint in those categories? So those applications come across many fields. So there's a lot of applications in energy. I'm working also heavily with the steel industry in the bio areas and even agriculture. And a lot of different companies are looking to reduce their footprint. So a lot of what I do is I work with those companies to basically redesign their processes, sometimes invent new pieces of technology to make that happen. And that gets reflected in all the courses I teach. So the two big undergraduate courses, which students here would take from me, one of them is basically the act of building a flow sheet out of chemical equipment and then running it in the simulator. So it's sort of generating what you want the flow sheet to look like. What are the different parts? How do you put that together in a chemical process? And then running computer simulators so you can find out how that works. So there's one class in that. The other class is in energy systems engineering. It's basically all the ways in which we make and use energy in the world. So we would start with things like coal, natural gas, oil, biomass, the sun, and trace how the energy moves from those resources through the value chain, like through drilling or transportation, pipelining, cleaning, production, delivery, and then how they're used in final energy products like your car, power plants and chemical equipment, that kind of thing. So it's a very holistic, big picture view of the world, and students come away with a really much better understanding of the different, not just the scientific issues, but the political issues as well, because it's linked to everything that's going on in society.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right. I think the general public have no real idea how vast and complex sustainable energy is, right? Like, it's such a hot topic, and you being a specialist in the energy systems field, where do you see the energy landscape moving in Canada over the next few years or even the next decade?
It's a really interesting question because I don't actually know where it's going to go. I can see a lot of big directions, but the political battle has changed so rapidly, and I can't really predict how the political forces are going to go. We're seeing some major changes in traditional energy. The oil sands, are really fallen down since the pandemic. And, the fact that we can't get pipelines in or out of there anymore, pretty much anywhere in or out of the country, has really caused that industry to start to decline. For example, University of Calgary got rid of their petroleum engineering undergraduate program. Now they have a lot of other energy type undergraduate programs, but that, the petroleum specific one, they can't have enough students. People are not interested. So students can see that, they can see that decline of that industry, but what's going to replace that is not clear in Canada specifically. So, we have to replace that energy infrastructure in some way. One of the big debates is how vehicles are going to, be powered. And I think that's going to be really the easiest way to start that discussion, because we're looking at a rise in electric cars, electric vehicles, which could be one technology. And the alternate to that is hydrogen. So most governments in the world since the beginning of 2020, and this includes Canada specifically and Ontario separately, have proposed or established a hydrogen development plan or a hydrogen economy plan of some sort for how they're going to try to build infrastructure to power things on hydrogen. And that's a really interesting problem because this was really in vogue early 2000s. So the first W. Bush administration really was pushing for this as well. And after about 8 or 9 years, that kind of fell apart because the problems around hydrogen being extremely dangerous, extremely difficult to transport, it has a very low energy density, even when it's compressed. So it's not an obvious technological solution, and it's quite dangerous as well. I know that I have a friend who's an engineer at Siemens, for example, and he no longer will work on any hydrogen products because he's just, too afraid of being around the gas because it's extremely dangerous. So, we're looking at a situation where politicians have been pushing hydrogen, frankly, more than the engineers. And so it's going to be interesting to see the crossroads between how we go forward, and biofuels are another option between the electricity and the hydrogen. But there's so many barriers for all of those things that I don't know. It's going to be a very interesting next couple of years.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point about opinions. Everybody has opinions. Everybody wants a certain thing, or they think that a certain thing is better than another when maybe they're coming in the politician's case, they're coming from what they think is better for everybody, but they don't know all the, the complications for that sort of thing. So just going off of that, another thing that everybody seems to have an opinion about is renewable energy sources. So, take your pick of renewable energy sources, excuse me, your biomass, your wind, or your solar. What do you think as Canada moves towards what they deem as a net zero carbon economy by 2050? Are we going to be able to use a lot of these wind and solar technologies? And what are the greatest barriers to adoption, maybe technological barriers to adoption to actually make that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, right now we have this big push toward, net zero by 2050, and different agreements around the world. I think from the bigger picture, the goal of getting there is more important than the goal of actually achieving it. So, even if we don't get to net zero, the act of moving toward it and the development technologies and just continual improvement, I think, is much more valuable and important. So I'm okay with setting a goal that's not necessarily attainable, because I'm not so sure we can achieve some of these things. And one of the interesting barriers for us in Canada is we're just in a cold, northern, low sun place. So we see the drop in solar technology costs, but I mean, we're so far north that only makes sense certain times of the year and certain days, and the amount of energy you can get this far north doesn't really seem all that promising for us specifically. It makes a lot more sense in other parts of the world, but there are so many barriers. I think the biggest one for renewable specifically is the intermittency issue. That's the one that everyone talks about, right? So you have, you're harvesting energy from when it happens to be available at that moment. You're not really producing it on your own demand. So you're really just dealing with things outside of your control. And so in order to do this on the mass scale, we need massive amounts of energy storage. And I'm not sure we have that capability right now. In terms of, batteries, for example, there's a real question of the world's supply of lithium. It's very hard to get lithium, very nasty to get lithium. If you're going to go with that kind of a battery, there's other kinds of storage solutions that we can try. But the challenges of integrating that into a useful framework are really, really difficult, especially, for example, if we go to an electric transportation system, right? The demand for electricity specifically rises so drastically that the generation problem becomes much, much worse. So I think, for Canada, we've got a lot of it's just gonna be very, very difficult to take a country that's so spread apart, transport and produce this electricity and store it on demand. And to do that in a way without things like fossil fuels might be a real challenge. So, I mean, there's hope because the costs are going down and they continue to go down. But then that's going to come back once the demand grows worldwide. So do we have a supply of all the conflict metals that we need, for example, to build some of this technology? Will there be enough metal? Will there be enough technical expertise in the world if everyone's competing for this same technology? So we're just one small piece compared to the whole rest of the world. So there's a lot there, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be going toward it.
Yeah, and these challenges are definitely something that our chemical engineering students will face as they graduate, right? And so, do you have any tips, or like technical or otherwise, that will help them help position our students in this energy industry?
That's a really good question. One of the nice things about chemical engineering is that it's very versatile. So I mentioned the petroleum engineering department closing. That's a very specific field. One of the nice things about chemical engineering is you can go into so very many areas. So if petroleum itself is on the decline, it will be replaced by other forms of energy. Energy itself is going up. So with chemical engineering, you can work on basically any aspect of current and future energy production at every level. And if you look at some of these solutions that are coming forward, so much of them are chemicals driven now. So if you talk about anything in the hydrogen economy, that's a chemical process. Whether you're producing hydrogen, you might be storing it, you might be converting hydrogen to a different chemical like ammonia or formic acid that you would transport and convert it back to hydrogen. If you're dealing with advanced power plants, you've got things like chemical looping, you've got carbon capture type situations. So when it comes to sustainability, chemical engineering really gives you those tools for all of the future solutions. I mean, if I look at what's coming I can just give you a laundry list of technologies within that category. It's anything in the biofuels, electricity, anything in the hydrogen, the power, and then you have all the other issues around manufacturing in general. You know, how to make not just chemical manufacturing, but all forms of manufacturing more sustainable. It's really chemical engineering that has all of the tools to do that. So you go back to the classic, mass and energy balance, looking at things like economics and life cycle analysis and sustainability. All of those things are well within the wheelhouse of what we do. So that's the nice thing about this degree, because we're actually poised with all the fundamentals to really meet the changes. So I have no concerns about our students, going into the workforce, because, you know, we're going to have to adapt to a reduction of jobs in Alberta, but we're seeing a huge increase in positions in those other kinds of areas. And then, of course, you can expand into other things too. Pharmaceuticals, for example, is another big growth area that chemical engineers are heavily involved in, and anywhere in the bioeconomy. And we're also seeing it more in information technology, because a lot of the skills that we learn in chemical engineering when it comes to, systems in general, complex things, programming, you learn programming, optimization, all of those things actually translate into saleable job skills when it comes to computers in general. So they need people to work on things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and how those are connected to areas of the industry. And so we're seeing more and more of our students, particularly our graduate students, working for Amazon, IBM, in different places, working on these really advanced machine learning and computer driven solutions. So there's a lot of things you can do with this degree.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. I think the versatility of the degree cannot be undersold, and you put it into a really nice package there that was super useful. You did mention some graduate students there at the end, and everybody knows you in our department and even in the faculty as that guy that you go to when you need to write a reference letter for a grad student, because you have a great eye for grad students, and you know what you're looking for, and you know how to sell people's skills at the graduate level. And since probably a decent number of our students might be looking into advanced degrees like masters or PhDs in the field, do you have any advice, maybe one piece of solid advice that maybe somebody gave you going into grad school, or something that you see in some of your best grad students for our students, should they choose to go that way?
Yeah, I have so much more than one simple piece of advice, but I think one of the interesting things that I found is, when I look for a student, when I'm trying to recruit a student, I'm looking for what I call the spark. So for me, the spark is someone that has the spark has this innate ability to ask the right questions. And then they have the ability to start to seek out those answers on their own. Right. So we're looking for people with independent critical thinking skills, people that can challenge the status quo, people that challenge myself. When I look for people that don't just do whatever I ask them to, I want them to counter my ideas and say, Dr. Adams, that's not a good idea, or I don't think that's correct. I think that, maybe this alternative solution is a better way to go. So I'm really looking for people that have that really innate ability to challenge and think critically, and sort of take a step back and look at the bigger picture of what they're doing, and so they can place their ideas in a broader context. And what that means is that what I'm looking for less is things like GPA. I've had students with, I mean, for your listeners, your podcast hosts are some of the all-time GPA scores in our department's history, but not everyone we take is like that. So, some of my best students were B students, and it's because, what makes a good graduate student is not the ability to sit in a course and do well on a test. It's the ability to have a long-term, big picture goal and enough motivation to achieve that goal. If it was for any particular advice when you're applying for, for a position, the number one thing that I look at in an application is their statement of interests. Because like usually in all applications, wherever you apply, whether it's here or anywhere else, you want to write something about yourself. What is it that you are interested in doing? And you'll get some people that say, oh, I'll just do whatever I want, whatever you want. I'll do everything you tell me, Dr. Adams. And that's not what I'm interested in. What makes the best kind of application is if they actually propose a research program where they've got some new idea, even if it's not truly new, it's something they think is new. And then they put together some ideas for how they might solve it. And they also talk about why they want to solve it. Why is this an interesting problem to solve? Like, if you solve this problem, what are the benefits to society? Will you be able to learn more about some area? Will you have, be able to build things with lower emissions or reduce costs or achieve a higher yield or whatever? And, when I read those things, I'm not actually looking for a project, which is great. We can take it and then we'll work on that project. What I'm looking for is that the person has taken the initiative to really think critically about the world around them, generate an idea, and then do a little legwork to try to put together a coherent plan. And that, and I've hired people on that basis alone without having any real I've hired people that weren't even chemical engineers because they just had the ability to come up with an interesting idea that maybe not even be right. Like they may have, oh, you didn't realize that this has been tried and it's a terrible idea. Well, that's okay for me, because it's more about, did you go through and, really find something unique? So I would say that's my number one advice, is that uniqueness and the ability to show that you stand out by going beyond like a classwork or a job mentality. And that's really what does it for me.
That's great advice, Tom. So we are going to go to some more lighthearted questions now. So when you're not writing grants or, listening to oral 3GO4 defenses or parenting your 5 kids, what do you like to do for fun?
Oh man, yeah, the parenting the 5 kids pretty much consumes it all these days. But I have no shortage of things I love to do. I think what I'm able to do now is limited, but I do a lot of long distance running. So I run a marathon every year. I do a half marathon every weekend, pretty much. So that's more for, that's for mentality. Like that's for me. That's how I unwind. My mind turns to jelly. Those are the times of the day when I'm alone in the woods and I don't have to think about engineering or all the other problems in the world. I can just let my mind go to jelly and I just go. But I really enjoy that. I really love soccer as well. I've been playing soccer for a long time. I was very involved in soccer administration for quite a long time, in BK times before kids. So those are really big things. I love playing tennis. It's been a while since I've been able to. I love sports in general. I love playing baseball. So used to love softball. Curling as well. So Jake here got me into curling, and so we've been doing that now for the past several years. So I love doing a lot of like team sports and activities around that. I love music. I play a lot of different instruments. I do like I play the keyboard with my church team, for example. I'm learning the accordion right now, which I'm really quite poor at, but it's still a lot of fun. And I love, video games and board games as well. And just, being with my friends and playing all kinds of board games, but particularly more on the sort of strategy side.
Nice. Yeah. Everybody knows the Adams family is the team that could field an entire line for the Seattle Kraken, right? The NHL expansion draft, you can get an entire forward and defense line out there with your 5 kids. So maybe Hamilton will get an expansion in the future. And obviously, Tom has not listened to last week's episode of the podcast where I just went off on how much I hate long distance running. So, but funny story, right? We have seen you out there on your runs before when we're out walking, because that's what sane people do over long distances. So anyway, okay, that's great. And we love to hear the context about how profs have lives too, right? Like, you have interests and passions outside of, being locked up in an office yelling at an Aspen Plus flow sheet or something. So that's great. So as you may know, we do this goofy segment at the end of every episode. We do a tier list, right? So that's all the rage on the internet these days. And so a tier list, in case you're unfamiliar, is essentially we just take a bunch of items from a topic and we rank them basically using letter grades from school. So A, B, C, D, and F. And then we also have an S for like Sam tier, which is above A. So that's your super tier, I suppose. So we're going to do board games. Speaking of your passion for board and video games, so we're going to do tabletop board games this week. And we were wondering if we can get a 30-second hot take from you on a couple of different games on our list. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Okay, so how do you feel about Settlers of Catan?
So I give that an A, and I give it an A because of what it did for the board game industry in North America. It took us from Monopoly and Life and that kind of thing, and turned it into more of a more competitive, more nuanced game, and made that mainstream. So it's not my favorite game. It's really great, but I'd say A.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that. I think the impact is more than the value of the game itself. Speaking of Monopoly, and because we got to throw a couple of ducks at you too, right? So speaking of Monopoly and Game of Life, that era, that's kind of like what I would call like the 10 to 14-year-old era, maybe 8 to 13-year-old era of games. What about Risk?
So at this point, I'm down to a C. I mean, I played Risk was very transformational for me in the board game universe, but the mechanics are just so awful, I think. And it's just so long. I think Mission Risk would be the variant I much prefer, which is a much shorter, focused version of it, and I think that's much more tractable. But I mean, I can't. As a game, I don't think it's that great technically, but it really brought me into the world. So I have to give it at least a C.
Nice. Yeah, I have history with Risk too, right? Like my cousins and I just would make a deal about playing this epic game of Risk on Christmas Eve. It was like our tradition for like almost 10 years. We played this epic game of Risk on Christmas Eve together, and I loved it. So it was more about the company than it was about the game. And last but not least, knowing that you're a fan of strategy games and you like to have things under your control, how do you feel about Yahtzee?
Yahtzee would be the least on my list. I much prefer games, like I said, under my control, where luck is a reduced element. I'm going to give it a C, even though I'd much rather play Risk than Yahtzee, because I used to play Yahtzee with my grandma all the time growing up. So I have like good grandma memories, right, with Yahtzee. So we'll go with C. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. See, I had no idea. Yahtzee for me is not all that high scoring at all. So, and then just kind of going off the board, we heard a rumor that you're working on a game of your own. Do you want to maybe give us a quick plug for your game?
Yeah. So I've been developing a game called Orbits. Orbits is basically kind of like Space Settlers at Catan, but I would say it's a much more nuanced version of it, and it's basically it's for 2 to 6 players, and you start out on like a decaying Earth, or Terran as we call it, and you have to colonize the rest of the solar system. And to do that, you have to build a technology tree to be able to give yourself the technologies that allow you to go maybe in deeper, farther away, colder, hotter places. In the solar system, you have a network of like a transportation infrastructure, ships for moving cargo and resources. Each planet has different resources on it, and the game board is different every time. You have cards you choose from for what kind of planets you have, what kind of resources are on those planets. And then this is played, the board is a circle. So basically you start in the center, and then every turn the planets move a little bit around the center on their orbits. And so that's basically what that does, is that has an interesting dynamic where the land where you're colonizing, exploring, developing is moving, and everything's moving kind of at a little bit different rates. So your trade networks start to move apart or come together. And there's a lot of really interesting strategy when it comes to multiplayer games with up to 6 people. So it's more like space chess, I would say. It's a completely luck-free environment. And it has a lot of complexity and nuance for competition. And it also doesn't have a destructive element. So unlike Risk, where you're killing things and destroying things, this is purely construction. It's kind of like Settlers in that respect, where you're not, once you build something, it doesn't come back down again. So we really love it. We're at the point I have a beta prototype now. We got the board, we got the pieces, and then everything kind of fell apart in the pandemic. So I was putting this all together in March, and then the supply chain to be able to get, plastic pieces or the board, everything completely fell apart. And then that's where I am right now. So once things come back together, I'll be able to finish production. I think it'll be really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to see a game of Orbits at my local game store. Have to give it a go. Well, thank you very much, Tom. You've been very generous with your time. We've been chatting for a little over half an hour already, so we would like to say thank you so much. I'm sure that our listeners, which after the first airing of the podcast is more than we thought. We thought it would be 2, but we're up in triple digits, which is kind of fun. Although I did look at YouTube and the average view time is only like 7 minutes and 12 seconds or something. So I don't know if we can really count that. But anyway, you've been awesome. So thanks so much.
All right. Thank you both.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, welcome back everybody to the Heat Exchanger, where our last segment is going to be a typical tier list, which we've decided to do every episode because they are fun and kind of brainless. So today's tier list, as you heard possibly in the interview with Dr. Tom Adams, is on tabletop games, on board games. So some people like to call them board games, some people tabletop because, card games count as tabletop games too, right? So basically things to do at the cottage when it's raining. And our judging criteria for the tier list this week kind of has 3 pieces. So we will be judging things based on how fun or stimulating the game is, right? So first things first, the game has to be fun. You have to enjoy playing it. Second, it has to be good with friends. So this could mean both, currently it's good with a large group or even just a small group, or maybe you've had good experiences with your friends in the past. And last but not least, it needs to be replayable. So, certain games don't really make it onto this tier list that are more like, say, for example, Pandemic Legacy, season 1 and season 2, excellent games, but once you've played them once, they're not exactly replayable. So we're focusing on games that like you can bust it out of the closet at any point and people will be down to play those games. Sound good?
Sounds good. So let's get it rolling. So Jake, what's your thought on Settlers of Catan?
Right. So yeah, so we asked Tom this question, right? The first 3, we asked Tom all 3 of them, right? And I'm going to agree with him on Settlers of Catan. I'm going to give it an A for impact. It is the first massively successful Euro game, as they're called, or some people like to call them a point salad. So it's the kind of game where you generate your own economy. There's not a lot of conflict. And at the same time, luck, although not absent in Settlers of Catan, right? It's controllable, a little bit more controllable, right? Like you can side on high probabilities, you can side on a certain strategy, whereas a game, for example, like the next one's coming up, like we asked Tom, they really heavily rely on the randomness of a dice roll, and it's very hard to control your own fate there frequently, right? So Settlers of Catan gets an A. I give it a B for the actual game itself. It's a good game, and I've kind of grown accustomed to much more kind of complicated games, which is a good and a bad thing. It's harder to teach people how to play a more complicated game, but if you get the right group of people, there are games since Settlers of Catan that follow that formula that are much better games, right? But that wouldn't exist without Settlers. And I have had, like, we used to play a game of Settlers of Catan, like when I was in university, home for the summer, like working for the summer, living at my parents', like we would play after work. And like, that was a feat because my dad like worked long hours, like 6 to 6. He was gone from 6 to 6:30 or something. Like he was gone 12 hours a day. And we would still play that game after dinner every day. We took a box of Settlers of Catan to Mexico on like winter vacation when I was in like second year. Like we packed it in a suitcase and took it with us. So like, it's an amazing game. It gets an A for me.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Like this is probably the first game that I played that was in that category, right? The Euro German, whatever game you want to call it. And I remember probably not high school, but university and later in my university, we would play 5, 6, 7 games of it in a day. with my housemates.
Oh yeah.
So like good with friends, replayability for sure. It is fun. It does get a little bit tiresome at like if you play too much of it. The part that I really don't like is like, yes, like that luck piece. I mean, like you choose, a square that's like, oh, you don't want the 2s and the 12s, right? But then like you get a roll of like, you always get like 12s and 11, and you don't get any resources. I'm like, ugh, like, you know what I mean? Like it's out of your control.
Yeah.
And then the worst is when your friends just like pick on you because like they know like, oh, like Vince is good at this game, so let's just gang up on him and like block off his rows and things like that. And so it is what it is. I would give it an A just because like this is the game that we played a lot. And fun fact, Jake, being the good guy he is, he bought my kids the Settlers of Catan Jr. for Christmas last year, and we played. I mean, that game removed a lot of the I guess difficulty. So like, I mean, Settlers of Catan is not difficult, right? but like the Catan Junior, like, I mean, it has that gameplay mechanics, but obviously it's dumbed down in some way. But my kids like it, so I have to give it an A just because of the spot that it has in terms of the like introducing me to the board game.
Yeah, and well deserved, right?
Yeah,
well deserved.
Yeah.
Okay, so your next one is we're going to do a couple of classics here, and by a couple of classics I mean three in a row. So the second one, same as Tom, is Monopoly. So how do you feel about Monopoly?
So first of all, disclaimer, right? So I played Monopoly as a kid. Again, I grew up in Hong Kong. I don't think we played it correctly. I don't know why. So you know how like in Monopoly, like you got to buy all the colors before you can build things on?
Oh yeah.
That's not how we played it, right? Like,
beautiful.
When I came here, I was like, what is happening with these like white people playing this game? This is not the way. So little did I know that my parents taught me the wrong way of doing it. Secondly, like the way we build was like, we buy the property, and then if you land on that property again, you buy it. You can start building.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't ask me about like how to actually play Monopoly, but now I know how to play. Secondly, I don't think I've ever finished a full game without like at least someone just giving up. It's like, like, I have money, but like, I'm just gonna like declare bankruptcy, like Michael Scott, like I declare bankruptcy. And then like, they just don't want to play anymore because it's like 5 hours in, and then it is what it is. And it might be because the way that we played it was not correct. Maybe that's what it is, but I have to give it a solid D, because it's just too much luck. I mean, there's some strategy, but like, it's definitely not good with my friends because nobody wants to play after 4 hours.
Right.
And it's not super stimulating. It's just like going around in circles. So there you go.
So Monopoly for me is a B. Okay, let me explain. So first of all, I have never not finished a game of Monopoly. Fun fact, if you play the actual rules, okay, so everybody plays the house rules, right? It's like, oh, if you land on free parking, you get $20,000. Oh, congratulations, right? If you play by the rules, Monopoly is pretty ruthless. Like you can be out of that game very fast by just like, because there's just no way to make money. Like it's so easy in Monopoly, right? To extend a game. Like you land on, Atlantic Avenue and you owe me $1,200. And I'm like, no, just give me your 2 reds and we'll call it even. Right. Right. Have you ever played that way? Like you do that all the time. No, if I demand $1,200 from you, you actually just lose. Like there's so many situations where it's just like that cripples you, like you're done. So yeah, anyway, Monopoly for me, the games never really lasted all that long. I have a collection of different sets of Monopoly because it was my favorite game when I was a kid. So I have Nintendo Monopoly, I have Legend of Zelda Monopoly, I have Marvel Monopoly, I have hockey, I have baseball, I have all these different ones. I have an original copy of Monopoly from the 1950s when it was not called Monopoly before the Parker brothers took it over. It was the concept called finance. Okay, so it was a game called Finance. Talk about super boring. But I found it at a dump where they had like a recycle center where you could just take stuff for free. Yeah. It's also where I got my dresser drawers in my bedroom like 15 years ago. So, but I found this there and I still have it. It was my favorite game as a kid. The house that I lived in as a student that we bought in 2007 was a perfect little cube with no deck and no shed and nothing. It was just one of those wartime houses over on Gary Avenue. Okay, represent Gary Avenue, number 91. I don't live there anymore though. And it looked like a little Monopoly house. So we named it. It was called the Monopoly house. It was on the wall. My parents had like a picture made calling it the Monopoly house. It was fun. So anyway, Monopoly has a lot of history with me. The game itself, I don't play it anymore, right? Because it's unplayable. It's just random and it's kind of stupid. So, and nowadays, it earns even less respect because one of the best outcomes to Monopoly is like learning to handle money and like manage your finances. And now the newer versions of Monopoly have an effing credit card. Like, are you kidding me with this garbage? So like everybody's got a credit card and they just buy their stuff that way. Like that's poison. Okay. Like that's terrible. So like the complete lack of needing to know basic arithmetic or like, how to make change is like, come on, like get out of here.
And we wonder why our kids can't do math. It's because of Monopoly.
It all is tracing back to the Parker brothers decision to take out cash from Monopoly. So
anyway. I think I have a frozen version of Monopoly for my kids and we opened it once and that's about it.
Yeah,
so there you go.
I have the Monopoly Collector's Edition that has 68 tokens, each in silver and gold. Wow. Not real gold, but like silver and gold, like all of the tokens that have made it into every core set of Monopoly, and then some bonus ones that my buddy got me because he saw it. It's like this really cool big collector's edition box. So
now, is there resale value on that box of finance that you found?
I doubt it. It's used, right? It's not in particularly good condition. I wouldn't sell it anyway, but I don't think so. I don't think that there would be good things. Real quick, what's your favorite piece in Monopoly? Real quick.
The car.
The car. It's a good answer. It's a good answer. I'm all about the top hat. I used to be Battleship when I was a kid because battleships are sweet. And then as I got older, I'm like, nah, I'm a top hat boy. So, all right, moving on. You get to ask me one now.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. So what's your thought of risk?
Right. So risk is risk gets, this is kind of tough, right? Risk gets a B as well, man. And I hate to do it because it just seems cowardly because again, risk is not a good game, right? No. It's bad. It's got bad mechanics. It's got like, I think Tom said mission risk is slightly better, but like, the actual attack defense mechanics are so broken in Risk that it makes no sense. And it's susceptible to one of those games, where it lasts like the entire day or the entire weekend. But I like it for a couple of reasons. Again, I've never played a game of Risk that I haven't finished. And that's because the games that I play, they don't tend to last all that long. People are efficient. You just give her, everybody knows the rules and whatever. So I have some great memories, like I mentioned in the interview with my like cousins or whatever, like playing overnight games of Risk or playing at Christmas Eve. Classic thing right there. But Risk is the kind of game for me where, as for you, it's Settlers. You said like your friends just gang up on you because they're like, oh, Jake's good at this game, so let's just like, work against him. And like that legitimately became just a meme before memes existed amongst my high school friends at our Christmas Eve, our annual Christmas Eve game. It just became a thing. Like if I had to be the first one out, lol, that's funny. Let's do that. So that's what happened. But I came up with a genius strategy based off of The Princess Bride. Okay. So the Battle of Wits and The Princess Bride, the two classic blunders. Do you know what they are, Vince?
No.
Okay. So the two classic blunders: never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line, but more well-known is never get involved in a land war in Asia. Okay. So my strategy to not be first out was to only draft Central Asian territories that had no strategic value. And then instead of doing the usual thing where people obviously put all their armies on the front line so that they can attack, I just put 3 or 4 on everything, just to make it so unbelievably inefficient and just like such an incredible drain to actually attack me for no gain that it worked. I called it the slow burn tactic. And I would just sit there all game and just slowly accumulate armies and just make it almost impossible to make it worth trying to attack me. So there you go. But anyway, Risk gets a B. Again, it's more I still think Risk is playable. I don't think it's a good game, but I think Risk is playable. I'll still play it with my friends from time to time.
So I would have to give it a C. I think it's better than Monopoly. But again, maybe I just have friends that can't like last for more than an hour, you know, like just like you know what I mean? So I mean we play and then like all the times we play, there's always this guy or this person that would like just hang out in Australia and just like, you know, and just like do nothing and just like you can never win the game.
No,
they can never win the game, but exactly. And like
you got second place if you go
never finish this game because like you just won't die. And then I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and then you know, like, and then the most frustrating part is, you know, what we have an army of like, you know, 15 versus like 5, but then like you keep rolling like low numbers and then they keep like, it's just like, I agree with you. The mechanics of the game is it's just garbage. Yeah. But
no, it's always, I will say, so Australia is where you go to be second. That's just what you do. Right. And the end game. So usually when we play, to be fair, you like split victory between two people because like the end game for Risk is extremely painful. Like it takes a long time. Like that's where something like an online version is way better because it can automate the dice rolls for you and it's just much, much faster. But like the end game is pretty painful. Like when somebody's like marching across the world and it takes them like 20 minutes just to do their turn. And it's not because they're being slow. It's because that's just how many dice they have to move. Their like 7 cannons, 5 horses, and 23 dudes, you know, from Alaska to Kamchatka to try to backdoor somebody through Asia and then get down to like, you're like, oh my God, it's painful. Right. Yeah. So anyway, cool. So moving on, our last classic game in our little streak here. Vince, what about Clue? How you feeling about Clue?
So, I mean, I would give Clue a B.
Really? Really? Oh my God. Okay. I'm going to have something to say about that. No, go ahead.
Because my kids could play it because it's so easy, right? It's
just like you're stealing the ability for me to just shit on Clue now because I'll look like an ass to your kids. But like,
right? Because I mean, my kids have never played it, but like the prospect of them playing it is possible. So because they can say this person was in this room with this object, so they have the ability to do that, right? Now. The actual game itself is kind of garbage. You know what I mean? Like it's just a checklist of like, you know, like just like, hey, okay, I was in this room. Okay. This person was not there. Okay. And so on and so forth. Right. And then like the most frustrating thing is like you're all the way on one side and you want to do stuff on one side and then you get called to another room and you're like, like,
yeah, no,
like this is brutal.
So bad. Like
all my progress is like, okay. So anyways, now you could, you know, you could go ham on.
Okay. So Clue is garbage. All right. Clue sucks. So Clue gets an F, right? If you can play a game like Clue where I play with my brother and my brother on turn 1, okay, will look at his cards, right? Because you look at your cards, you know what it's not. Right? You know, it's not the answer. And he will go to the first room that he doesn't own in his cards and make an accusation. And, you know, you make an accusation and if it's wrong, you just lose, right? Yeah. He will just go and make the accusation. And then when he loses, he'll just leave. And my brother, if it can't engage my brother, like past turn 1, then like, what are you doing? Like Clue would be so much better without a die. Why you got to roll a die to move between rooms? Yeah. If you can already call each other between rooms, just allow people to go to any room that they want on their turn, please. Like, oh my God, man. Anyway, so Clue is an interesting mechanic where people have information and you need to be clever about what you ask for to specifically eliminate things. Like, you know, for example, trying to argue that somebody, you know, beat someone with a lead pipe and you own the lead pipe. You know, it's not the lead pipe, but you're looking for other information. And like other people don't know that you have the lead pipe, for example, like that's got some merit, but like basically Clue just comes down to a game of like guess who, and it's just like so freaking dumb. So anyway, I hate Clue. No disrespect to any of our listeners that like Clue.
Educational for the kids because it's reasoning, deductive reasoning.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
And that is why we also play Guess Who in my house. So there you go.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
So all right, so now like out of the classic games, what's your thought of Dominion?
Okay, Dominion is my favorite game, period. So Dominion is S. Dominion is an incredible game. Those of us that have not played it should play it. It's got it's a drafting game. I love drafting games. Okay, so card games where you build your own deck. Most of the video games I play are drafting games. Okay, like Slay the Spire. I've been playing some Griftlands recently. You know, any of those games where you have kind of like control over a little bit of chaos. And I understand. I said in Catan, like I don't like the luck factor. But the thing about Dominion is that you really do control the probability distribution of your own deck. You have the ability to influence things by taking cards out and putting cards in. Dominion is got a good theme. It's got infinite replayability. Okay. Like in terms of replayability, I will not, except for maybe like a game like chess. Okay. I will not entertain the argument that there is a game more replayable than Dominion. It's got like, I did the math on it once, like, and this is like 2 or 3 expansions ago. I said, like, if you truly pick a random deck of cards, you need to choose 10 cards, right? From the sets, and the sets are all completely, you can combine them in any way that you want, right? There's no limit to the combinations of these things. If you picked purely at random amongst all of the different sets, there's over like 100 trillion possible game combinations, like of different boards that you're playing with. So Dominion, I love it. It's good with friends. You say that you played like 6-7 games of Catan in a day. When I was in grad school, one of my best friends, Neil, he lives in Dundas here now, but he moved back from Japan and he was living in my brother's house at the time, and he was working in Burlington. And like on a weeknight, like when I was in grad school, there were weeknights on like a Tuesday where we would just go over there after dinner. My wife at the time, girlfriend, Neil, my brother, and we just had like 2 games of Dominion going in my brother's house. And we would play till 2 a.m. And we would do this like three nights a week, weeknights. Like it was an obsession with this game. It was amazing. So anyway, Dominion is my favorite game. The end.
And I think to your point, right? Like even with the original set, I think like there's 15 types of like
24 different cards. Yeah, so it's 24.
Well, like not counting the estate and all that
not
stuff,
counting
right?
not counting the whatever. So like, how do you do a choose on your calculator?
Right.
I
So
don't
like
remember. 24 choose. Oops, that's not the right thing. 24 choose 10. 1,961,256.
And then multiply that by like 4 players or 6 players or whatever.
Exactly, right? So that's the number of game combinations in the original set alone.
And then now you have expansion. So I agree. I think Dominion is a really good game. There is a little bit of luck, but you, like you said, you control that luck, right? Like you get to choose what card is there. I think, again, like it depends on your group of friends. I think it could be a little bit daunting because of all the cards that you have to learn, and because of all the combination, because depending on which cards you choose to be in play, you need slightly different strategies.
Oh yeah.
Right?
And that's part of the allure to somebody like me, right?
Right, exactly, right. So if you have like really casual gaming friends, then like me, like I have friends that are really into like tabletop games, and then I have friends that are like casual. Then maybe it's not super good with friends. High replayability. It is fun if you're like if you have a group of people that are really into it. So I would give it an A.
Nice.
Yeah, just because of the different strategies you get. Like like are you going to get all the coins at the beginning? Like, but then that would like take away all the actions card. Like all those things, right? Like.
Yeah, you're right. Even just the first 2 turns, because for those of us that aren't familiar with Dominion as a game, right? Everybody starts with the same deck of cards. It's 3 points. That's another thing that I could go into, is the idea that to get points, you have to sacrifice slots in your deck, and they're dead draws often, right? Yeah. Like, so in some of the expansions, they could be like a little bit different, but often you get points in your deck that when you draw them into your hand, they don't do anything, right? So they're terrible. So you got to time when you pick up points so that you can carry the momentum of like the good deck so that it doesn't dilute it too much. But anyway, my point is that you start with the same deck of cards, right? Everybody starts with the same deck of 10, 3 points and 7 coins. And those first 2 hands of 5, right? Depending on if you get the 3 coin, 4 coin, or the 2 coin, 5 coin is possible, right? Like it completely changes what you do, right? It completely changes how you behave with the initial layout. And that can be really interesting, even right there, right? So
apparently Jake could just go on and on about Dominion, so we gotta keep moving.
we gotta pick this up. We're dragging a little bit, so we'll be a little quicker here. So Vince, I know you're a fan. Tell me about Ticket to Ride.
Yeah, I think this one, even with like casual gaming friends, it's fun. I mean, the board looks beautiful, if that's a thing. It's replayable, I would like say, but the strategy behind it is not like, there's not a lot of strategy behind, right? Like it's just, there's some, but I think at the end of the day, once you play it a few times, you kind of stick with whatever strategy you have chosen. Like it's not like Dominion where there's multiple ways to win. And so I would give it a B, Ticket to Ride.
Yep.
Again, it's easy to learn. Kids as young as my oldest one could pretty much understand it, right? Like you draw a card, it's the same color, you could put it on, right? Like it is what it is, right? So,
no, I agree. Ticket to Ride is fine, right? I'm gonna give it a B as well. It's good. It's better than things like Monopoly and Risk to me. Even though it got the same grade, it's a better game. It just doesn't have that nostalgia, rose-colored glasses view from my end. And you're right. It's kind of like a Puerto Rico. We're not going to rate Puerto Rico, but there's kind of like 2 different ways to win Puerto Rico, right? The end. Yeah. Like it's an interesting game, but like you kind of have to do one of these 2 things. Yeah. And if everybody tries to do the same thing, it kind of drags out. And if people do different things, then it's like whoever accomplishes it first generally wins. So yeah, the variance there is a little narrow, but it's good. And it's easy to teach. So that's good.
Yeah. All right, Jake, what's your thought of Diplomacy?
I love Diplomacy. Diplomacy is a painful game to play in real life though, right? Like Diplomacy, for those of us that aren't familiar, it's like Risk, except it's kind of like there's no dice rolling and you can only have one army on a location at a time. And basically the entire game, and the reason it's called Diplomacy is because it's not really about your strategy on the board. It's about your strategy of managing other people, right? And manipulating other people or screwing them over. So Diplomacy can be a lot of fun with the right group of people. I'm a pretty exuberant person. You play with other exuberant people that get indignant or yell if things don't go their way, and it can be quite entertaining, I must say. But, in terms of playing it in person, it tends to drag on a little bit. The adjudication. Okay, so the gimmick to Diplomacy is that you don't take turns, right? Everybody does their stuff at the same time. And then a third party, the adjudicator, will resolve the turn after getting everybody's sealed orders. So I might say, hey, Vince, I need your help taking Berlin this turn. So support my attack on Berlin. And Vince is like, yeah, sounds good. But instead, you've got a side hustle with the army in Berlin. And you're like, hey, Jake's going to attack you this turn. I'll just help you defend. And then I'll backdoor him and like kill him with somebody else. And then like, I'm going in thinking like, oh, this is great. Vince is going to help me. And then you screw me over. Right. And that's the point of the game. Makes a lot of enemies. So anyway, Diplomacy, if you can play it online, it's fantastic. You do like use an online client where you submit turns every day or 2. And you can just play with your friends, kind of a long-term thing. And you can like text back and forth to like try to browbeat each other. So anyway, Diplomacy is good. I'm going to give it a C. I'll give it a C because it's just kind of not great in person, which is kind of the best part of board games, in my opinion. But it's a good game.
Yeah. Like, to be honest, I think I played it once in person and it was just too much. So I would give it, I like the idea. I think that there's no chance, like no chance involved.
Yeah.
I like the history of it. It's actually developed by like a diplomat, apparently.
Yep.
And the whole like human engineering side, like, and just like trying to outwit others. Like, I really think it's quite interesting. But I would have to give it a C. The actual like mechanics of like fighting or like, stepping into different territories, the adjudication piece. It's just too much. So I have to give it a C.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Sorry, I just did a little live editing of our tier list because I saw Ticket to Ride was on there twice somehow. So how about code names, Vince?
Yeah, code names is a fun party game. So like it's very different to, let's just say, a Dominion or Diplomacy. So I would give this a B, a code name, because like it's replayable. It's good with friends, especially if you have friends that like very well, and like you just say like one word, and like that no one would understand unless, like, let's just say you have like inside jokes and whatnot. Like I enjoy that part. Whereas like so when we play, like me and then I have like two best buddies, like they are, and then we usually play with like our wives and whatnot, right? They try to separate us out because like we have all these like inside things, and then we just like say this one thing that nobody would know, and then they're like, oh, how did you get like, cookie 3? And it's like like just like off the chart, like so that to me is fun and stimulating, and then we can always make fun of like other people. It's like, no, like we can't think logically, we have to think like this person, right? Like we can always just like gang up on one person or make fun of them. So I'll give it a solid B.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on everything there, and I'll give it a B as well. So like a good example of that is my best man at my wedding, Stuart. Shout out to Stu. Like we were playing once at his place in Kingston when he was going to Queens, and there were 3 words I was the clue master. There were 3 words on the board: knight, link, and I think knight, link, and sword. And I said ocarina. Like my word was ocarina, right? And like he gets knight, link, and sword, and then like we're playing against like this group of girls, right? They're like looking at me like, what did you just say? Like, how is this a thing, right? So yeah, no, like once you get those inside connections, it can be pretty cool. So yeah, code names is good. It gets a B. Maybe bordering is low B for me because I don't know. I would like to play something else, but the good thing about it is it's a good party game. Also works pretty well online, right? Like you can play that one online too.
All right, so let's go to a classic, chess. Well, what's your thought on that?
Chess is like one of the greatest achievements of mankind in terms of recreation. Let's just be straight, right? Like there are some games like Mancala or backgammon where you think you're classic clubhouse games. But chess is like, it stands alone as maybe like the greatest game ever made. I'm sorry. It really is. It's crazy. And not to go all Queen's Gambit or whatever, but it can be entertaining to watch chess. You get like, there was a surge of streamers on like Twitch and YouTube playing online chess after the Queen's Gambit came out, and it was exactly right, and it was super popular. So anyway, chess is an A. I don't play it that much. I'm fine. I'm passable at chess. Like I've played with some undergrads that have challenged me in some online chess. Shout out to those people. I haven't lost yet. So not to
flexing here,
but Jake. That does not mean that I'm good. It just means they are bad. No, I'm just but no, I'm okay. I just remember I used to play chess a lot with my dad, and he would beat me consistently. And then when I was like 15, we went on a trip to Italy, and there was a chessboard. We were staying at this like rental house in Italy, and there was a chessboard there. And I was playing with my dad, and I started to beat him for the first time. Like I beat him a few times, and he was getting a little rattled. And then one game, he like got me down. I just had like a rook and a bishop left. By the way, rook is my favorite piece in chess. I love the rook. So I had a rook and a bishop, and he still had like his queen and 2 knights and a bishop or whatever. And I beat him, like the comeback, and he has never played with me since. So, love you, Dad, but like he won't play with me anymore. So anyway, chess is an A. Chess is like, you can't say anything bad about chess.
Yeah.
Can you? Like,
so like I said, I grew up playing Chinese chess. I was never introduced to like the real chess, I guess, until much older. So I always found like these type of board games really interesting, right? Like I played Chinese chess, Go, if you know what Go is. It's and then like chess, I really picked it up. Like, I mean, now I'm gonna sound really basic, right? Like, so I watched Queen's Gambit, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, I had a chess app even like years before this, but like I really got into it over this past couple of years. And like my wife would attest, like I literally just play with chess puzzles all the time now, just to like use my brain. And like my YouTube, half of my YouTube feed is random chess videos right now. So I have to give it an S.
Nice.
It's just, yeah, it's
No, it's
again,
deserved.
I don't
deserve.
Yeah, it's deserved. Like, I mean, like the strategy behind it, like it just boggles my mind when I'm like looking at, like, just say, international masters, grandmasters, like the number of lines they have to remember, it's through the roof, right? Like every opening, like, just, it's crazy. Like it's, and then it's like the replayability piece, right? Like,
yeah,
like every chess game is a new game at a certain move, right? So it's like,
yep,
yeah.
Yep. It's like you can look at it in terms of like even the logistics function. You look at somebody go and look up a YouTube video from like 3 Blue 1 Brown on the logistics function on like the infinite branching. Like at a certain point it branches, and then each of those branch, and then each of those branch. But like it's not like just like a tree, like a 50-50 thing. But it's pretty crazy how many combinations you can get to once you reach a certain threshold, especially when you're given that many choices and that many possible board states, right? So cool.
Yeah, and I mean, like, chess has not been solved yet. Like, it's not like checkers, right?
Yeah.
And that's for good reason, because it's just the combination is astronomical, right?
So good.
Anyways,
how about we got 3 left here? How about Carcassonne, Vince?
So again, so I would give Carcassonne a B. We actually play this with my friends, and again, it's a good entry level like game. It's not overly strategic. Again, it's kind of like Ticket to Ride, whereas like there's a few strategies, right? Like you could go for like laying down on the field. You could like claim the roads, and then you could like claim the cities. Like I mean, that's the basic ways to.
There you go. That's Carcassonne,
right? Right. Again, the kids can play because they like the meeples and the dragon.
Of course.
Of course. And literally they're just putting like little tiles together where they fit, right? So there's that factor. But again, I could only give it a B because I think the strategy, like after you play it for 3, 4, 5 times, there's not much you can do beyond that. It gets a little bit stale. But if you play it once in a while, like it's a fun game.
Yeah, I like to play Carcassonne with my parents and Laura when we're up at the cottage, because we don't go up there all that often. So when we do, it's something that everybody knows the rules, right? Nobody's gonna complain about that. That's the same as Puerto Rico, right? So like even though the strategy is somewhat similar, it's like whatever. I mean, it's we don't play it often enough for it to get stale. So yeah, I would agree. Carcassonne gets a B for me as well. We seem to be agreeing on everything for the most part, except for Clue.
Except for Clue, where you I
hate that freaking game.
All right, so we're down to our final 2. So the penultimate one is social deduction games. I know, pulling out a $1 million word there. The Resistance, Avalon, Werewolf, and I guess like Mafia, like that
sure 2 rooms and a boom. So I love social resistance games, social deduction games, excuse me, like the Resistance, mostly because I think they're good when you play with good, intelligent, cunning people. And you and I both went to grad school, and you're smiling at me like I'm like, oh, most people aren't intelligent and cunning like me. Look at me, I'm the smartest man in the room. No, that's not really my point. It's like I love playing games with people that are cutthroat. Let's put it that way. That like to scheme. Okay, it's not necessarily a compliment. And in grad school, we played. So we used to have benders up at my parents' cottage all the time. Haven't done it obviously in a while, or pandemic obviously got in the way of that. But we would just go up for like a 3-day party, and we would have on the pool table downstairs, there would be like always a game of 10 people playing Avalon or the Resistance, like at all hours. There's like 30 people there, and we're outside like playing yard games and doing whatever. But there's always like 24 hours a day, there was 10 people playing a game, because it just became such a thing. So I love those games. I like to believe I'm okay at them. I like to believe that I can like lie. I'm not amazing at it if you know me, but if you don't know me like some people do, then it's possible. And like, second shout out in as many episodes to my buddy Jaffer Gauss, G House, who was featured in our story from the Austrian Airbnb. But like, I have never seen, the man is so nice. Okay, like, he's from India, is from Chennai, super polite, great dude, love him with all my heart. But once playing the game of Resistance, I just like lied through my teeth to the group and convinced everybody that he was the spy, when he knew that I was the spy, because he had the power that let him look at my card, right? So he looked at my card and he knew that I was a spy, and I still convinced everybody. And I've never seen him erupt in anger quite like he did, like when people voted him like off the team or whatever, and he was furious. And like, this guy loves these types of games. He came to Halloween party with the Chem-Eng Club once with a blue blanket, safety pinned around his head and a ball of tape. And he was supposed to be Merlin from the Merlin card in Avalon. And like, man, I love that guy. But like, I think my crowning achievement of a social deduction game is when I threw him under the bus and he knew that I was lying the whole time, and it still worked. And it was awesome. So.
And I think that's the beauty of these games, right? It's just it just brings out the worst of everybody.
Oh yeah,
and it's fantastic. So did you give it a rating?
I gave it an A. Well,
Yeah.
maybe I didn't say it out loud, but
Yeah.
but it gets an A from me. It's not the same as Dominion, but I give it an A.
Yeah, so I would give it an A as well. I mean, like, I wouldn't put Mafia in the same, like, Mafia, it's just too basic. Like, there's like the Resistance, that there's actually like ways where you could actually deduce.
Yep.
Like, like there's mechanics in it.
Yep.
So I like that. It's not just like randomly saying things, trying to convince people, but like you need to think through the game. But at the same time, you got to lie. Like, I'm terrible at these games, but I'm just fascinated in people's psychology and just like how to do it. And that part of the game really gets me. So that gets an A.
Yeah. It's great. So special shout out as well if you're looking. So if anybody listening is interested in actually trying any of these, there is a large crowd social deduction game that we have played also at these cottage trips, because like, it's really hard to find a game for like 30 people, right? Where everybody feels like they're involved. There is a game called 2 Rooms and a Boom, which is like a simulation where like everybody's assigned a secret role, but there's 50 roles, 25 split between 2 teams, like the terrorists and the president. And like, basically there's a bomber and a president. Okay. I'm serious. And you get split up between 2 different floors in a house, and like everybody. So like you get a random card, and then you split the group into 2. And the whole purpose of the game is that there's 5 negotiation rounds where the team leader will negotiate and exchange hostages. And the red team at the end of the game wants the bomber and the president in the same room. And the good team wants them in separate rooms to save the president's life. And your role, who is the president or whatever, is secret. And you just have to talk to each other to try to convince each other to trust you, to show you the card that you've got, so that you know who the president or the bomber is, so that you can manipulate the game to like make that happen. It's actually amazing. And then like, to make everybody have a special role, that you're not just like the president or the bomber and then nothing. You're the president and the bomber. And then there's like all these like special cards. Like, some of them are goofy, like you can't lie. If somebody asks you a question, you can't lie. So if they ask you what color you are, you have to tell them the truth. But there's the one that's like, you can't tell the truth. So like, somebody asks you, you have to lie. Or like, there's one where you have the special power to like tackle somebody before they go into the the exchange, and prevent that. Like, you're like the security guard. So like, you can stop. So like, everybody's got a 1-up, like a little bonus, so that it's not stale, right? So that you have a special thing. It's great. Anyway.
Yeah. Hopefully we could get to the point where we can have 50 people in a room,
Remember the days where 50 people could be in the same place at once. Last but not least, Vince, and then we're going to wrap up here. Think back to your high school days, right? Sitting at the loser table in the cafeteria, just like me.
Hey.
I said just
that's like a strong word, loser.
Hey, I'm just speaking from personal experience, man. I don't know what you're talking about. How do you feel about Wizard Poker, better known as Magic the Gathering?
I would give it a solid B. Because I mean, it's nostalgia, but it might not be like the best type of nostalgia because of what you have just explained.
Not to like that's
loser
just, that's
table
just
and
a
whatnot.
common that's just a common perception, right? Like we both are adults.
Yeah,
If you play Magic the Gathering, we both play Magic or played at some point Magic the Gathering extensively. So this is absolutely not a knock on you, right? This is like
so I mean, like, honestly, like we played a lot in high school, right? Like we just have Magic cards, and I mean, like, I was cheap. I just like borrow a deck, and I just like took a deck from a friend, and so I just always used that deck. And but I think like the beauty of the Magic the Gathering is that you could build your own deck, right? So like I had a squirrel deck, blah blah blah, whatever. But I think the mechanism of the game is really good. I think it's replayable because of just the number of cards there are, and is it good with friends that know how to play? Yes. But I think that the learning curve and just like you have to study and like, okay, like how do I craft this deck? It's quite overwhelming. So I would give it a B there.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to give it higher than a B. I realize now that a lot of the things that I've given are A's, B's, a few C's. I didn't give a D, but I gave an F to Clue. Get wrecked, Clue. But I'm going to give it an A. I love Magic the Gathering. I still play it. I don't play it very much anymore. But when I was in grad school, I played it. I did not play it in high school. I played it in elementary school, and then I didn't play it in high school. And then I picked it up again in like grad school, and like I was really into it for a while there, and like it changes. And I think the best thing to do in Magic the Gathering is not constructed, where you like, sit there and think about things and you look up the meta, right? And everybody's like, oh, it's the blue black zombie deck with card milling it just destroys everything.
Yeah.
I think the best way to play Magic with your friends, if they know what they're doing, is to do a draft, right? Where everybody comes with 3 unopened packs, like booster packs, and you have unlimited lands. And then you do a draft where everybody opens a pack, you take a card, you pass the remaining to the left or to the right or whatever until all the cards are gone. And then out of the cards that you've drafted, you have to make like a mini deck, like a 40 card deck with the lands in it. And then you play like an elimination tournament. And I love that because that's thinking on the fly. You don't get the opportunity to like just build the ultimate deck with like thousands of dollars worth of Magic cards, obviously, right? And as a result, it levels the playing field, and it's still a lot of fun, right? And it's fun to draft. I told you, I love drafting games. I like Dominion. I like cards games where I get control over building a deck or something, even if it's in a limited capacity. So big fan of Magic the Gathering. So that's it. We made it.
That's it. Yeah, that's the end of our list. So
okay, so let's take a quick break and come back for a wrap up. We did commit to having a shorter episode this week than last week, and
we lied.
We did looking at the time. And editing out all of Vince's internet problems, which hopefully will not be terribly apparent by the end of this when it's all put together. But and adding in the interview with Dr. Adams, I think we're going to be like probably longer than last week. So that's terrible, but whatever. Shout out to the person that's going to listen to it 20 minutes at a time for 6 days and then take Sundays off. Sunday is a day of rest after all. So thank you. If you made it to the end, thank you for listening. Thank you, Vince.
No, thank you, Jake. It was a good time.
Yeah. And we'll be back. I have a little vacation next week, but we'll be back with another episode as soon as possible featuring, we already have that interview lined up, right? That's going to be a good time.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody.
See ya. Good night, everyone. All right. So note to self, no more bang chicks on the air, right? Yeah, we're really stepping it up in terms of content quality here.
And like technical, just
pure
gold,
no,
right? Like,
we are not stepping it up, but we just
no.
literally that's the go-to. You want good technical content, you go, hey, Tom Adams, can you just like talk into a microphone for half an hour, and then we'll just record you and use you as basically all of our good stuff. So.
Yeah. Sorry.
Children's interruption. Don't have that problem at my house, but
Adeline, go upstairs and watch something now. Go.
But Ellie's not here yet.
Yeah, then just watch Paw Patrol. Go upstairs. Go. Adeline, go.
that's incredible.
Bye. Okay,
But
then
I-
watch something else. That's fine.
That's parenting in 2021, baby.
Yeah.
Just go upstairs and watch Paw Patrol.